Hey everyone, welcome back to the Art2Life podcast. I'm so excited for another episode because I get to make art and we're gonna make art. And I hope you make some art too while we're talking. I think so many of us are probably working, doing our things, listening to podcasts these days. But if you're not and you wanna join us, I invite you to do so. Today's guest is Adam Rosendahl. You're actually my second person, like the first follow-up person.
Oh, right.
Like I've done this long enough to where it's like actually a year or two, a couple years have gone by, so we get to catch up.
Love it.
You're gonna love this. Adam's an amazing artist. He's got an incredible, how can I describe it? It's an art approach to bringing people together, increasing connection, collaboration, inspiring groups of people. We'll dive into it, you'll learn all about it, and thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, so good to actually be with you in person and get to create art together like this.
I know. So why don't you just, for those who haven't listened, and then we'll dive into making art, but just give us the quick overview so people know what you're doing, because it's pretty cool. His platform's called Late Nite Art, and there'll be links in the show notes and everything to this, you guys. Tell us about what your baby's been for the last, what, you've been doing this 20 years now?
Well, I'd say kind of doing it my whole life, but the business has been around for 12 years.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, and so as a business, what we do is we call ourselves a creative learning and development lab. And we create events that are most of the times for leaders and organizations to build trust and collaboration and connection really quickly using this art process. So I go into offsites and I go all over the world, and there'll be like a large group of people along these long kind of banquet style tables, and I lead them through a 2-hour process that gets them into a space that they wouldn't usually get into inside of their team, that uses art and music and kind of curated conversations to like interrupt the pattern of business as usual and really turn strangers into friends, to create a deeper sense of connection with teams who are coming, who are remote. And it's just been like an incredible kind of journey.
So. Yeah, and art making, which is what you're doing with everyone, is it does bring you to yourself. So in a way, because I've done different workshops and things where once all the artifice has been dropped, and this happens at our workshops too, once people are like being more comfortable and they're more themselves, then connection can be made and it just gets really great. You feel better because you're just yourself and other people are seeing you and you're gassing on everyone. I mean, that's what you're doing at the fundamental level. And yes, it's an organization, maybe your boss is there and you get to be in a different space with them. But isn't that true that you're just using art to bring out your natural, like, oh my God, actually, I feel so good doing this. I mean,
yeah, the way I've described it is like art is the secret backdoor to connection, and part of it is like
love that.
Sitting on a table when two people are creating together, it creates like a third space or like an intermediary between two people, so they don't necessarily have to make eye contact as they're talking. The creation that's happening can really lead to some deeper conversations and connections that they wouldn't expect. So I found it to be an incredibly effective tool to use to actually change the way people relate and listen and talk to each other.
Yes, totally. That third thing, having something that you're making now, you're doing, and maybe we'll do this today, we're working on our own things here, and I think it's kind of interesting, like we could be working on the same thing. I mean, I could do this podcast where it's just one big square, which would be kind of cool. But that's what you're doing, right? I've done his events, and you're sitting. The tables are not as far apart as this, or maybe a little narrower, but you're working on this thing together.
Yes.
And they're a new person, but you're learning about them, getting comfortable with them, it's great.
Yeah, I mean, part of what I've been doing I've been doing this since I grew up, which is getting people together into a room with one big piece of paper and using music as a way to create like a really good atmosphere, and then just getting people to build off each other's ideas. So there's that game Exquisite Corpse, where people are building off each other's ideas and they're passing a piece of paper around.
Yes.
And in some ways, like, my whole entire business has been sort of built off of this concept of building collaborative art with others, letting go of a sense of the self or the individual and stepping more into a space of a collective, or like, what are we creating together? So just in a very practical way, like when I work with organizations, the whole practice is a really helpful way of getting people out of their ego and their sense of like just thinking about themselves and thinking greater about like what is possible when the entire group of people is building and creating and innovating and experimenting together. So the whole thing is a metaphor.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And this thing of, you know, if you have a shared thing you're doing and you're sitting across from someone you don't know, you can kind of like, you get a sense of them slowly, and it's comfortable, and you're not having to say, okay, hi, my name's Nick, and where are you from, and that awkward thing, you know. So which is
that's exactly. I mean, this is what I often say is like, I feel like this way about any of the art forms, you know, when we talk about creativity, and I think about visual art has been like my medium of choice, but when anybody is creating anything, there's so much of themselves that comes through in the painting or that comes through in the process that that's really hard to share with words. So I do feel like there's a whole nother way of getting to know people just by the handwriting, the marks that they make on the page, the way that they kind of approach this.
And in many ways, that's what's kind of led me to this place where the conversation you're gonna have, because we're doing something else, you know, it's like, don't try to have a conversation, but just have something on the side of something else becomes almost more penetrating, more interesting, certainly more unexpected. I just find, and I was always like the big doodler, you know.
Me too.
When I have other things, I just think the brain loves that. The brain loves to have a potpourri of things going on. I think we do our best work, you know.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've always been drawing while talking to people on the phone or during meetings. I was just describing, I was on a meeting this morning, and I love creating like visual artifacts from conversations.
Yeah, and what's amazing about you is that you can draw realistically, and you're pretty good at it, and so that's kind of like a small miracle. You're doing a translation of this meeting that was just a conversation, but then there's this artifact that looks like the person. I mean, that first time I saw you do that, I was just so blown away.
Yeah, it's like a fun way to, I think in general, like a lot of the work that I do is about helping people feel seen, heard, and understood. And I love when art can be a tool to help people feel seen, heard, and understood. And so there's a lot of ways that can happen. And I think that the practice that I've developed with Late Nite Art is a beautiful way to help people feel seen. That's like a big goal of the process, is that people kind of, I see it when people's mouths drop open and they have this look of wonder and just this feeling of like, this person really gets me, or they really see me. And the art can be an amazing way to reflect back who someone is.
Yes.
You know, but then also by drawing someone's portrait during a conference or in a meeting, and then being able to show all of their ideas written around them. I call this illuminated notes. And it's become another business that I have, that I do kind of as a side thing, where I draw portraits, and then I collect people's quotes and ideas, and I figure out a way to basically represent who they are through a drawing. But then when I show that to someone, sometimes people start crying, sometimes they just can't believe it. And it usually is this moment of like, you really get me. You are really listening to me.
Yeah.
And so that's been something I've done my whole life, even when I was little, and now I just do it in a little bit more professional context.
It is the best feeling when you nail it. Probably the first large painting I ever made, because I used to do illustration, and I got this project from this woman in San Francisco who owned this restaurant called Embarco. And it's no longer there, but it was high end, and it was my friend, Mark Fox, did the identity, and the logo was Embark, like E-M-B-R, like a dog, Embark. So there's this dog theme. So anyway, I did this big painting of this dog, and she was really, it was a hit place. So it wasn't like a cutesy dog. I did this kind of like iconic dog looking at the moon, and it was really like, you know, just super textural, this wolfy dog. It sounds goofy, but it was done in a way that was really had a lot of emotion and feeling. And I worked on this thing, and it was it was a 4-foot painting or a 5-foot painting, the biggest thing I'd ever done. And I brought it in to show her, 2 months later or whatever. And she walked in the restaurant, and they hung it up, and she came in and she saw it. And her face she started crying. And at first I just thought, oh, like I've blown it.
Yeah.
But she was so moved by it.
You nailed it.
She wept.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I will do this the rest of my life. Now, that's illustration, and it was really about pleasing her rather than me so much. I mean, I liked it, but it is a great feeling. It's a great feeling when you make that connection, for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Can I use one of your pencils?
Yeah, sure. So do you use acrylic paint much? Because you use those watercolor things, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I studied art at UC Santa Cruz, and
Yeah, but I mean,
acrylic paint has been like
a staple.
I was a muralist for 6 years. Actually, I painted murals
Oh my God.
as a job in high school and college every summer, all around Sonoma County where I grew up. And so acrylic paint was my main medium, and then at a certain point, I shifted into watercolors, and so I mostly use watercolors and pens these days. But,
Yeah. Well, they're fast, and
I like things that are fast. I like things also mediums that have like some level of spontaneity. Like letting go of control actually feels very. I'm happy to let go of control.
Yeah. So what made you get into this? Like, as a kid, like, how did you find this? Like, why did you? I mean, I think it's fairly sophisticated to think, or mature or something. I mean, for me, it was always about me and my picture, but this idea that, bringing people together and creating a work that's beyond just myself. I mean, I wish I had been more like that, but I mean, was that something you just got into as a kid? I mean.
So I was so lucky to basically get enrolled in this arts-based leadership camp when I was 13. And my whole life, I considered myself an artist, and I was always drawing and painting, and from age 2 years old or something like that. But I went up to this camp when I was 13, and the idea was that over the course of 8 days, 50 teenagers, 25 adults, using different art forms as a way to connect with ourselves and connect with each other. And it was an extremely diverse program where there was 50% of the young people were coming from subsidized from foster care and coming from like a variety of situations around the Pacific Northwest. And so it was just an incredible group of people in the middle of the forest, kind of off the grid. And then you had all these artists and activists who were leading workshops like painting and freestyling and beatboxing and playing guitar. And in that, I really got to experience when you do art with a group of people, how it can be used as a very effective educational tool for us to learn about ourselves and learn about other people. And I had very cathartic experiences there where by the end of the week, I felt closer to these, my peers than I did to a lot of my closest friends.
Yeah.
And so I had this feeling of, the way my mom describes it is that my heart cracked open. I had a spiritual experience.
Wow.
And it
How
all
old
happened,
were you?
I was 13,
Jeez.
but it all happened through the arts. That was really the magic. It was also really, really good facilitators that were, weaving this group of strangers and turning them into a community. But that's where I was inspired. And I realized pretty early on that I didn't want to be alone in a studio. Like, I wanted my art practice to be collaborative. I wanted to be with other people and creating.
Yeah.
And so part of the origin of Late Nite Art is that I loved throwing gatherings. I loved bringing people together and introducing people into the practice of creating art together. But and it was always about the process. It was never about like what was actually created. I mean, when I did murals, it was about, we wanted to create something. But so that was the beginning. That was the origin.
And then you're working with artists and non-artists, obviously. What unlocks people? I mean, this is great information for all of us. I mean, what do you find? Because that's what you're doing. In many ways, I'm doing the same thing in a lot of my programs, like unlocking people to what they didn't know was even there. They didn't know they didn't know. What is that a fair way to describe it?
What unlocks people?
Yeah, like what is it like getting them to, like, you use words, you use I like some of the ways that I thought were really, that I loved when I did your event, is people go around and they see the challenges that other people write notes, and then they respond to those notes, and people are helping other people, almost like this person's just like me. And I know from my teaching that when people feel like, oh, Nick's just like me, or everyone struggles with these things, it somehow like calms everybody, and we can just get on with it,
Absolutely.
And you really do that so well.
Yeah, I'd say most people, walk into a room and there's a lot of insecurity, there's immediate judgments around how we're different than other people and limiting beliefs. And especially in a work context, there's a lot of power dynamics going on. So there's all this internal, chatter.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I do to address that is through music. And so the music that I use is a really important part of my creative process. And the Late Nite Art method is kind of like a soundtrack to a film. It's like the music as people are walking in,
so good.
the music that as people are creating art together, the music that as people are even in conversation, like every part of it is around helping to take off the armor and like kind of like lower the barriers between people and start to realize like, wow, there's so much similarities between us. There's so much here. And so, the music is part of it. The art making is also like a very equalizing process that melts the hierarchy and the power between people.
Yeah.
And giving people this like step-by-step process where they're taking small risks and with increasing intensity and having a feeling of success or a feeling of like, oh, that wasn't that hard, or just, lowering their anxiety around creating art together.
Yes.
It's just all of those things allow for people to get into more of a flow state and into a space of forgetting that they're even at a workshop or that they're even making art. That's kind of the point, is getting people into that space of flow and self-discovery.
Yeah, and the music is this abstracted, this is what letting people feel these different feelings, it's so...
It can, the music can be an embodiment of an emotion or of a feeling. And you can call it manipulative or you can call it irresistible. It's like, I like to create those environments where it's like irresistible. Like people are just, they're just like overflowing with like how much they like love the moment that they're in.
Yeah. So, I was just at the Mind Brain conference, and, this need to self-express and is in all of us, whether we know it or not. And that's what science is telling us, the latest research, that part of feeling amazing, part of not just surviving, but thriving, flourishing, as they say, comes from making things, comes from doing it your way and expressing. Do you find when you, like there's a definitely people leave that room feeling better, and it's kind of a miracle, like do you follow up with people? Like how do you describe it? I mean, they feel better just because it's like, you'll feel better if you just go for a walk and come back, you'll feel better? Or is it that they now, like, what's going on, do you think? And
I think that, there's a lot of stats around this, like around how lonely and disconnected people are in the workplace.
Yeah.
And that, only very, very small percentage of people actually have a close friend at work. And that, people generally don't trust their coworkers. So there's a lot of stats right now, especially with hybrid and remote work, around how it's not a pretty picture. And so when I create spaces where people step into a space of like letting down the armor or the barrier and then really creating a very meaningful moment between people, it's so rare that happens, and it's so special that it's lasting. Like people really can make a true friend or a real relationship, and it can happen in like a very short period of time. And also people have this experience of this cathartic feeling of being seen in a way that also can like create real trust between the people around them. And so these kind of things, when I talk to people 9 years after the workshop and they still remember every moment, or they met somebody and they remember like the origin story of them meeting that person and now they're really good friends. Like these are things it's amazing to see that they're not fleeting.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, I mean, one takeaway from this conference I was just at is do more, because you connect, you meet people, but you've actually shared something. You were in the room when such and such happened. You all did something together. It's so much better than, okay, I follow you on Instagram, I kind of know what you do, and that's what you're kind of creating in a safe way.
Creating a meaningful shared experience that helps people humanize each other beyond their title or whatever kind of like normal prescribed way that they introduce themselves in a conference. I think it's really important to get people out of their normal way of programming.
Yes, totally. And I can imagine, like if you've got the boss or someone in a higher position or longer, more control, more powerful position, and then you have someone who's just starting out, you're kind of on equal footings.
And that's one of the beauties of the arts. I think it melts the division and the hierarchy between people. And I have like a very visceral image of a CEO of a private equity firm across the table from like the new intern at the company. And the CEO is a big kind of guy who is like professional athlete, and there's just this like looming authority, and having them describe a story about the neighborhood that they grew up in, and then to actually illustrate each other's stories and then share it back to each other. Like I remember just the laughter and the connection between these two men. That was just such a beautiful example of how art can put people at the same level really quickly. Just no matter what their roles are.
That's so cool. So one of the exercises was, I don't think we did that one, where you share your childhood's neighborhood, you describe it to each other.
Yeah, I mean, all the workshops I do, I'm always constantly changing the prompts and like the theme of it depending on who I'm with. But yeah, I often try to think about like humanizing people is a really big goal. And so getting people to share about when they were little or when they were kids is a very quick way to drop people back into their humanity, or just like outside of the role that you're playing, outside of the like how important I am, like idea. And so especially when people are growing up in different countries, it's a beautiful way for them to understand how people had a very different experience when they were growing up.
God, that's great. Yeah, it's like we've all been kids,
Yes, and it's very, just like there's all this stuff around if you're in conflict with your partner, just imagine them as a child, But I think it's similar with your coworkers.
Yeah. It's funny because I've never had a job, like I never worked for anybody. And I was terrified actually, and I always wanted to work for myself, and I did. But I think I would have, given the right, when Pixar came along, I just thought, oh man, I would have loved to work at Pixar. I would have loved to work with a team, a group of people. Now I have a team, but I was really intimidated. I mean, I was terrified. I didn't want, I don't know why, but it's so interesting to hear you talk about how, to get people to comfortable working together, like that's the whole, there's so many challenges that come into the workplace,
Absolutely. I mean, I also have never had a corporate job. I've had a lot of different positions and jobs, and I have an interesting relationship with authority in which I always find myself in some kind of conflict situation. And so I ended up becoming self-employed about 11 years ago. And now that I'm working a lot around team and organizational culture, and I now have a much bigger team. So there's about 12 of us now.
Yeah, tell
inside
me
of
about
my
that. It's
company.
new since we last talked a little bit, right? Or you were doing it then, but it's now firmly here.
Yeah, I mean, I talk a lot about organizational culture and team dynamics, but now I feel like I'm really in that much more deeply as a leader, creating a team dynamic and a culture with the people that I work with. We just did our first offsite internally. And
Wow.
so there's a big opportunity for me right now to walk my walk. And so that's
Yeah.
been like a really big part of my journey is how do I create community with the people I work with? And
Oh, that's so good. Tell me about your own art. And I know, maybe your own art this is your art, but like are you more free? Does it interest you? You know what I mean? I know it interests you, but like what, like for me, my art is, I'm like working on a show. Like I'm still hanging on to it. And I'm not yet, yeah. So I've always just kind of had it in my back pocket, and maybe it's just I've always just had that. But you're making art all the time, but are you more free with it now? Do you think about, oh, I want to do 20 paintings, or like how are you thinking about it?
yeah, well, I mean, one of my art forms is, like I mentioned, I love doing portraits of people. And so, and I've been doing this practice where I like read people's books, I listen to all their podcasts, I listen to interviews, and then I kind of capture all of their work in a number of quotes. I do a portrait of them and I write all their notes around the portrait, and I call these illuminated notes. So it's a way for me to actually like take somebody's entire company or their vision or their concept
Wow.
and turn it into one image. That's very like fun to be able to share.
And it's cool for them, right?
It's a really cool gift that I can give to somebody, is basically just like capturing and embodying their work in a single image. And so I started doing this about 2 years ago, where I create a drawing of people that I'm really inspired by in the realm of creativity, workplace culture, and human connection. And so every month I do one portrait of a person that I find to be like an incredible like leader in this field. And so that's been a fun like practice for me, just in terms of my own art, like keeping that up.
Yeah.
And having consistency. I also I curate a playlist every single month, and like the art of music curation, I feel like has been like a really fun part of my art practice too, is like the right song at the right moment, but like creating playlists every single month. I think I was just telling you this before, like another aspect of art making that I just love is creating art as gifts for others. So I am consistently working on an art piece that usually is like a gift for a friend or for a birthday or for a wedding or for a funeral. And every time somebody meaningful in my life has passed away, I've always done like a significant portrait of them, usually writing quotes and words around them as a way of representing their spirit. And that's usually, at the memorial in some way. And it's so powerful to have that, even more than a photo of that person.
Oh, yeah.
Because, you can really feel their spirit inside of the drawing. So I just really believe in, like I said, like using art to help people feel seen, or for other people to see that person.
Yeah, yeah.
And so that's why I love art that has like a face, like some representation of a person.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
God, I wish I could do faces. I probably could eventually, but it was definitely something that I just steered away from. But I love that, you can do that, and it's so powerful, such a cool way to. You were saying you come up with prompts, and I think you're like me, like really good questions,
Yes.
are so powerful. And I'm wondering, where you find these, how do you, do you save them? Like, how do you gather, and because it's really the questions that you ask that is such an unlocking mechanism, questions that people wouldn't normally ask themselves, or they come to a place that they naturally question everything because of an experience they've had,
I have been experimenting a lot over the years with Late Nite Art as a platform for, asking people these meaningful questions and then getting them to visually respond with art supplies, usually with a partner. And there are certain questions which have been extremely effective in dropping people into a deep space of connection, and it just every single time, because I've done this now we've done Late Nite Art in 18 countries. So there's the cultural,
Yes.
kind of translation element of helping people connect when they're from different countries.
What's
different cultures.
universal?
That's a fascinating part of what we do. But so there's certain questions that I've found that just work, But then I also just love to experiment and try new things. I honestly used to be a little bit more experimental before, these days when we're doing a lot more work with in corporate executives and leaders, and there's just usually they're very kind of high leveraged opportunities, and it's a little less of an experimental space.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking about the old days of Late Nite Art when I was doing a little bit more public and community offerings, and I was having people to draw their relationship to wealth. Draw your relationship to death, and to give people 3 minutes. You have art supplies, a bunch of people who don't consider themselves artists, draw some kind of abstract concept, draw your anxiety, things like that, where it's
Right.
ooh, this gets very provocative really fast,
Yeah.
and fun. And these days, I orient a lot around storytelling and getting people to respond to a story and then to draw their partner's story. And I find that, getting people to visualize somebody's story and then reflect it back to them pretty much every single time I do this leads to this really deep connection between those two people.
So someone tells their story and then someone reflects back what they heard?
Yeah. So for example, I might ask, if it was between the two of us, it could be something around, describe the story of a meaningful figure in your life who inspired you to really step into the arts, more seriously, or who is a mentor or an inspiration for you as an artist, and your personal relationship with them. So then both of us would describe somebody in our lives, right? And then afterward, I would get us to think about, reflect for a minute, for you to reflect on my story, for me to reflect on yours, and then for us to draw an image that reflects. I would draw an image that reflects your story, maybe over 3 minutes, and I would start drawing. And then after that time, I would have people create a title and then think about 3 values that were represented in that story I can kind of see in you, or that I felt were represented.
That's so good.
And then when I finally kind of unveil that to you, it often has this gasp of, sometimes tears, sometimes people feeling oh, you really,
You got me.
You really got me. And then often when people are sharing stories about someone that inspired them, it also just it shows a lot about who they are, so there's a lot of kind of personal vulnerability that people share there. So
yeah. Wow.
that's just an example of
That's
what that can look
really
like.
great.
And that's a really big part of the Late Nite Art practice, is taking a prompt or a question like that and then getting people to visualize it and reflect it back to their partner.
Yeah. I think sometimes that's what's so cool about art, is that you have something to show at the end, this kind of art anyway, and then people can reflect back to you what they see, which is, talk about feeling good. When people really see you, it's the best.
Yes. What's fun about, abstraction, and it can go so many directions. So we can debrief these paintings that we're doing now. We could talk about all kinds of things, how they represent our leadership, what's going on in our emotional world, what kind of comes up. And so it's really fun to use art as a metaphor, especially when we're building off each other's ideas. There's so much that we could talk about, collaboration. And
yes.
And so that, for me, I'm really interested in experiential learning, and a big part of what we do is, like I said, the art is part of the process that helps us actually uncover so many things. So it becomes a really effective tool to be able to talk about things that might be a little bit more difficult without having like art as the
Why do
intermediary.
you think it unlocks? Like, I mean, I know it does, but I mean, what do you think's going on? Like I'm just doing these weird lines here, but it definitely, I feel like I am more connected, more in my person because I'm doing this than I would be otherwise. And I don't know, it's like if you feel, this is something I was noticing when I was at this retreat or at this conference, I was telling people, think about the emotion that you're feeling, think about the feeling you're feeling, and now write it down. And there's something about writing down how you're feeling that makes the feeling bigger. And you could tell your neighbor what your feeling is, and then your whole day becomes about this feeling at a certain point. But I mean, I think maybe I'm answering my own question, but I feel like it is being made evident. There's like this other thing happening that, if you will understand if you like this paint bottle better if you have another one next to it. If you have two things, I think it grounds us in a way to better understand what we're looking at, because so we have ourself, and then we have this expression of ourself, and then somewhere in there is where we're going or something,
It's, yeah, I mean, of course, there's like so much research around like how just like playing with color, like, like allows us to calm our nervous system. And there's the whole like adult coloring book movement as an example of like stress reduction.
Yeah.
But then there's just, I think that we live in this society that is just really, really focused around verbal communication. And as we know, like when we're communicating with people, there's so much going on with body language. There's so many ways that we express ourselves without words. But being able to do that through visual art is an incredible way to express ourselves. And it's also very refreshing to not have to talk. So I think it is an amazing way to be able to communicate, even if we're just communicating with ourselves, like similar to journaling, but without having to speak. It's like, what a relief,
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of the things that I'm learning. We were talking about teams and all that, and that idea that, really think about what you're saying and really evaluate whether you really need to say it at all.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I'm just shocked at how, like, because we just like, oh, I know a thing and I want to say it, but it really has an impact on people, just talking all the time, or, it's powerful. And then if you're talking, then the other people are definitely not talking because you're talking. And, I've just become over the last year or so, with the team and learning how to lead better and all the coaching and everything, just being quiet and letting others kind of talk I learn more. It's just really interesting. It's like just feeling something as opposed to directing it. Just make a move on the painting and then feel it. Let somebody express their feelings and feel that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I love this idea of visual communication, and it's a practice that I do at every one of my events, is getting people to build off each other's ideas visually without words, passing a paper back and forth and being able to do that. And what happens, I think it's such a relief for people because, there's most of us are always waiting for our chance to speak, and like when we're listening, we're not really listening. And so
Yeah.
I think there is something really powerful about like giving people the full floor to just create a mark, and the other person is just watching them do that and then building off each other. That creates a very different dynamic between people. But I also, when I have people share, I often create the environment in which one person is speaking and the other person is not interrupting or adding questions, but they're creating, a full minute and a half for one person to speak,
Yeah.
and then switching to the second person.
Right.
And a lot of people share that that's quite awkward and new for them, and but then they also think it's such a relief that they don't have to kind of like jump in to speak, that they know that they have a certain kind of amount of time and space to be able to share.
Yeah, well, it's just like really good listening.
But it's also like it completely changes what people share when they have a full 2 minutes and they feel like they're finished after 30 seconds, but then they have to share the whole time. Otherwise, it's just going to be silent. So it just like it gets people to share like one level deeper, and then it just changes the tone of the conversation.
Yeah. Oh, that's really, really great. Wow. Do you do a lot where you cover up stuff and go over stuff in your art, It seems like you get these pretty, like, I don't know, like one of the reasons I like painting so much is that I can cover stuff up that I don't like, because I don't like a lot of it. And you know what I mean? Do you do that? Do you ever just like...
I love like one of the practices I've been doing a lot more recently is doing watercolor paintings or acrylic paintings and then going in with white and just covering up areas of it.
Oh, yeah.
And it just, especially on people's faces, and it's amazing how just like creating more negative space like makes the busyness, like it recedes the busyness and it makes things pop so much more. So I've been playing with that a lot.
Yeah. I used to do, I do like, I'll do sketches at airports and, and I'm not so good at the likenesses, but just drawing, like if I'm at a laundromat, like I used to have to go to a laundromat, the best place to do art, to do drawing is laundromats. You get that like white noise. And it was interesting at this conference, we were doing this art experience and it was a lot of information people were getting, a lot of speakers, and so people would, on the breaks, would come and do this art experience. And people got into it and they were like, oh my God, I just want to stay in this space. Like it's so refreshing to just be just you, just making something. And people really appreciated that. That wasn't the point, but it's really the antidote to like being overstimulated,
Which, is certainly, I think all of us are overstimulated. I certainly am. And it's in a lot of the conferences and in the organizational offsites that I go to, people trying to cram it in with like keynote, fireside chat, And so creating this space where there's, like during my sessions, and there's music playing and maybe there's 300 people who are all along tables, like taking in the music, and they're building off each other's ideas visually, but without having to speak. It's just such a different energy and dynamic within a group setting. And there's this need, I think, for us to have the spaciousness to be able to take in information in a conference.
Yeah.
And it's amazing that people still haven't quite got that. Trying to like pack it in is just such a, it's just not an effective strategy if you actually want people to learn.
Right. Yeah, we think we're give them more stuff,
And you're making the most of all the people who flew in from wherever.
But yeah, you're just gonna have like a couple things that you'll take away, but you'll probably find them more easily if there's not 150 of those things.
Yes, but like the creation of art is an amazing integration process. So it allows people to take in the information that they've been learning. It allows them to kind of like process things in a new way and have new thoughts. And so it's a great complement to, a learning environment like a conference or an organizational event. to be able to create space for people to actually be in the
To synthesize it.
synthesize and create together, and not just be in this kind of like overwhelming like consumption of keynotes and information.
Should we switch? You want to switch?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's do it. I'd love to see what you add to this.
Likewise. I've never done this before here. This is cool.
It's great.
Yeah, we do this thing at workshops where we do this, but it's like we've got 50 people, and it goes like around the room. So you get 3 minutes on someone's work, and then 3 minutes, and you just get. It's so cool because you've realized that the joy of doing the thing, like this is so different for me. I wouldn't use these colors, and it's stimulating, and that's what's fun, is getting to respond to a new thing.
Yeah.
That's it.
And a different mark making quality.
Yeah.
Different colors.
Yeah.
I love it.
So what's coming up next for you? Give us I know you've got facilitators now. Like, where are you going? What's your big thoughts? Where you're heading with everything? What's exciting for you coming up?
Yeah, so within Late Nite Art, there are 9 of us facilitators.
Wow.
And we have one of our facilitators, Romy, who lives in Galicia, Spain. One of our facilitators lives in Cornwall, England. So the 2 of them in Europe, we're starting to do more and more work in Europe, and that's a big part of like what's coming is doing more work in Latin America, in Europe, in Asia, and finding the right facilitators who speak the language of that community, of that organization, but also can expand into this like different arenas, So it's Late Nite Art is such a flexible platform, and there's so many possibilities for how we can use this methodology. So another example that's really exciting is obviously there's so much conflict and polarization and intense division and competition between different people around the world right now. And so one of our clients just wrote up a grant in a project that she's doing with the UN to include Late Nite Art as a peace building process between North and South Korea.
Oh my God.
And to do it on the DMZ, so on the border between North and South Korea. So
Dude.
it's like, so thinking about
That's
using
insane.
this art making practice to actually build empathy and humanize people in conflict zones or in war zones. So this is like another part of what's coming, is using Late Nite Art in a very, very practical way to help people like build a sense of empathy and compassion for others who are so different from them, right?
Or that they think are so different. I mean, North and South Korea is perfect.
Yeah.
Right.
But part of also what's coming is, we did last year, for the first time, we did a Train the Trainer program with 12 of our clients who are coming from places like Stanford and Genentech and Google. And so we're going to do that again this year. And part of the reason behind that is just giving people the tools to do things that are similar to the Late Nite Art methodology, like what I've created when I help people use tools that bring more creativity and connection into the workplace. It just is amazing how people are taking it and then spinning it out in all these different ways. So we have people that are just including more music, just as like a very simple example, using more music in their Zoom meetings, for instance. Or just using visual arts practice in the way that they're onboarding new employees, things like this. And so I'm really excited to basically teach people how to fish, So like teach them how to do some of these things so that they can actually change their environments that they're in and make them more creative and connected, because it feels like a kind of a desperate situation right now. So that's part of what's coming for me is I was also just asked to turn part of the Late Nite Art method into a university course.
Wow.
And so there's like a really exciting institution that I'm going to be pitching the syllabus for a course to teach in 2025. So that would also be like a pretty huge shift in my trajectory.
The amount of people you can impact with that.
Exactly. Yeah. And Late Nite Art started in the classroom, and so that would be really cool for me to bring it back, because that's part of my origin story, is working with younger people in an art classroom context. And that's sort of what created the whole idea.
Wow. So if people want to do this, they have to be in an organization? Do you do like 20 friends or,
With Late Nite Art,
Yeah.
it's
I mean, I'm just wondering, like, how can people experience what you do who are listening?
primarily these days, we do stuff inside of organizations. So organizations hire us to do workshops and to help like build this sense of connection between employees and leaders. We also have been offering specific events for people who are people and culture leaders inside of organizations, who are executives inside of organizations. And then every once in a while, we do public facing workshops. It used to be something that we did a lot more. But these days it's more focused around organizations.
Yeah. And so you go all over the world, I think, right? Doing these?
Yes, yeah. We, like I said, we've done it in 18 different countries.
Wow.
And we have facilitators in Europe, so it becomes much easier for us to do work out there. I have a facilitator now who's in Mexico, who's from Guadalajara, and so when we do go to Latin America, I have a Spanish-speaking co-facilitator.
Oh my God. So what's the vision? Is just to impact as many people, get as many people going? What was the dream?
I'd say part of the dream and part of the purpose is just really leaning into that there's so many parts of the world that feel extremely disconnected, and using this creative practice as a way to connect people in a deep and meaningful and lasting way. And so when doing late night art in places that really need it, that are like desperately like disconnected, that's, I'd say, like what the goal is kind of using this in a very practical way. And we call it humanizing the workplace and bringing connection to the places that need it most. Those are some of the...
Yeah, but I mean, countries, right?
Countries.
Leaders like of these two...
Institutions like hospitals, schools. Yeah, there's a lot of work to be done for sure. And I think that we've created a practice that has a very practical component to it.
When you have facilitators lead these, I know it's going to be slightly different. Has that been a hard process for you to like teach this and let others facilitate, or have you kind of got that now?
Oh yeah, this has been a big part of my journey is teaching other people how to do the methodology and like letting them do it in their own way, because everyone has a very different style than me. So this is a big part of my journey right now, is figuring out how to be a really good teacher and trainer and let people kind of take what I've created and flex it and turn it into do it their own way and add their spice and their flavor to it.
It's so smart that you know that will make it better.
Oh yeah, but it's hard to let go of control. And I have really high standards, so I have like a hard time sometimes just like letting things be. But yeah, it's certainly part of the evolution, is like letting it grow beyond what I started.
Did you have any idea when it started what it was going to become?
It's been a kind of a slow and like organic evolution of Late Nite Art over the last 12 years. But at pretty early on in 2014, 10 years ago, I had the idea that this would become kind of like a TEDx model in which we had Late Nite Art chapters around the world, in London and Bangalore and Hanoi, Vietnam, and Uganda. We were going to do it in Kampala, Uganda, and Johannesburg, and all these places. And it quickly became clear to me that like having this be like a community organized event and trying to have a curator within each city was just a lot of work. And it was also like really hard to maintain the level of quality control that was really important for me. And there's also not a great business model to that. So
yeah,
I kind of, that stopped At one point, there was Late Nite Art Amsterdam, Late Nite Art London, Late Nite Art Vancouver, Late Nite Art
Really? Wow.
Oakland. Yeah, and so there's still the seeds of that possibility, but to actually like have like centers at different cities around the world.
Yeah.
And that would be more about community events. So in that form of the business, it would be less about just doing organizational work.
Well, and I can imagine this work in healthcare, you know.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, I've used this practice as a healing practice for a group of women who had stage 4 cancer
Really?
to explore their relationship with end of life.
Wow, that must have been.
I've done this also as a practice for families who are grieving the loss of loved ones who are killed in a fire in the Bay Area. And so Late Nite Art has been like an amazing platform to really explore hard to talk about subjects, from like race and diversity to death and dying to disease to the division. So
It's crazy because it's like this perfect model to grow with you. I mean, you got it right. You got so many things right out of the gate, and all the things you love in this form, in this new offering, and it gets to change now and grow with what the world needs and what you need. I mean, I think that's just friggin' amazing. You know, it's like you're not making potato chips and suddenly potato chips are no longer in fashion. You know, you're doing something that is so meaningful and helpful in the world. And
Yeah.
there's just this massive need out there.
Yes, I mean, there is no end in sight in terms of like the level of support that people need around human connection in the time of AI and robots and all the like kind of wild stuff that's going on. That is like, on one hand, very exciting. On the other hand, I think people are feeling like more and more disconnected from each other. So it's like, I feel like what we're doing is more important than ever, just in terms of creating a very accessible process that allows people in a 90-minute period of time to
Yeah.
build deep connections with
Yeah.
people around them. And yeah.
Oh, it's so cool. So as we kind of wrap up here, I'm just curious, like, maybe what's the one big, like, just the big lesson that you've learned in all this work? Like, just the thing that, the giant takeaway that it's changed your life, you know, or that you come back to again and again, that, you know.
I think something I think about a lot is just like something my mom describes as like just really to visualize that we all have this tender underbelly, you know, like no matter how hardened people are or how confident they seem, you know, we all are like very fragile and like kind of like just like we're all getting by. You know,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
we're
yeah.
really thriving and flourishing is a good goal, but really like
But really, we're just dealing with trying to feel like we have a seat at the table.
the human experience is challenging. And so having that sort of compassion for people, I'd say one of the big learnings for me is that like using like art and creativity has been, for me, it's been like visual art mixed with the right music, you know, in a group setting that is held in a non-judgmental way, has been such a doorway towards humanity, towards like people feeling seen and heard. So the big learning for me is just like everyone has this valid desire to be seen, and so it's kind of this desperate like longing.
Yes.
You know, yes,
There's a
from their
longing.
family, yes, from their like partner, but like really like from everyone. I mean, we walk through the world is kind of like wanting to be seen. And so like to be able to like create the space for that using art, and how, in some ways, how easy it can be. You know, so I think that's the big learning for me.
Wow.
Because I think that everyone can utilize that and can actually apply that in some way into their own circumstance. And that we actually need to do that.
Yes.
Because it's sort of a desperate time right now. So
Right.
yeah, just like it's not actually that hard to create this space where people really feel seen. But it just takes a certain level of combining these ingredients and some confident person to like really put it into practice, you know?
Yeah.
So
Adam, thanks so much for being here and sharing with us all the things and where you're going. It's super inspiring, really.
Yeah, well, so easy and great to talk to you, Nick.
Yeah.
I feel camaraderie in our vision of using art as a healing practice to help people connect with themselves and each other. So
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
In the work, here we go.
yeah, let's check out
Yeah.
what was actually created here. This is awesome.
That's so cool. So, you guys will leave the show notes. Did you make it now vertical? That's interesting.
I was slipping the orientation.
Okay, cool. So check out the show notes. You can find Adam at lateniteart.com, and it's LATE.com. Click on the show notes, check that out. Anything else people need to find out about you, or easy things? Your Instagram, we'll have the Instagram there as well.
Yeah, I think that's it. I mean, I guess the best way to keep in touch with me is through the newsletter that I put out once a month, which is a drawing and a playlist. So
So people can get that. Get the playlist, you guys. They're amazing.
Yeah.
And you have one you did for my audience. You made an art making one, which is really great. I'm always looking at your music.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right, well, thanks everyone, and I super appreciate you being here, and we will see you real soon. Okay, bye everyone. Okay, you guys, and before I go, I just want to remind you once again that we've announced our destination retreats. They're going to be in October. They're 8 days, 7 nights, and this year we're going to Morocco and Mexico. These are designed to cause a really powerful transformation, a shift in your thinking, and ultimately your creative expression. It's all about finding the truest version of you using art. You'll be with an amazing group of like-minded creatives. A lot of the spots are taken already, but we still have room, and these are so much fun. We will be having great connecting talks. The food's extraordinary. They're in beautiful places, both of these, and I'll be there. Obviously, I'll be bringing my creative team of coaches and facilitators, and it's just about deepening your awareness and connection to your truest self, which enables stronger, more authentic art and life. You'll be making a ton of art, and so if you're interested, again, artlifedream.com, check it out, and thanks so much. Okay.